This episode of Brains on Games is a preview of a co-op game with a science fiction theme. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about a game that's going to come up on crowdfunding very soon. It's a cooperative game with a science fiction theme that's all about flying around through space trying to save humanity from extinction. It's a game that was sent to me not long ago from the designer over at Flipside Games, and it is a game called Project EOS Rise. I hope I'm saying that name right, EOS Rise. This is a game for between 1 and 4 players. It works with kids age 14 and up, so it is complicated. It's more for teenagers than for the younger kids, and games play in about 1.5 to 2.5 hours. Let's take a deeper look at Project EOS Rise. Hopefully you can see the board here. I'm trying to reduce reflections, and this is a great big board that's really made up of 2 important areas. You've got your spaceship, the ship that's going to be flying you around through space, trying to collect radio signals and find the paradise planet that's going to allow humanity to be saved from extinction. And on this side is your map, which is where you're going to be flying that spaceship around. You've got a little spaceship miniature down here that's going to fly around these hexes that are connected to space stations, and there are radio signals and asteroid belts that you can mine. And this is a game, in terms of its complexity, it is a pretty tough one. I would say medium to heavy. It reminded me in some ways of Pandemic, when I have several expansions for Pandemic, the original version of Pandemic, and it's one of those games where players are cooperating together. Each character in the game has a special ability that they can use, and things become gradually more and more and more difficult as you go. This is that similar kind of thing. There is a lot to keep track of, and there's a lot that you can do. It's very much a sandbox game. And these are my first impressions of this game because I can't say I've cracked the code yet. I haven't been able to win a game of Project EOS Rise, unfortunately, and we did try very hard. But I'll tell you what, there's an extinction track along the side of the board that hopefully you'll be able to see. Like I said, I'm going to put up lots of graphics as much as I can. But there's an extinction track, which means you have a limited number of rounds before it's game over. So you sort of have to come up with the plan and then try your best to follow it, but you also have to be lucky. The goal of this game is to reach the paradise planet, to find it and reach it before humanity becomes extinct. And each round, the extinction track is going to move closer and closer to game over, and more people are going to be dying as you play through it. You're flying through space trying to find these radio signals that will allow you to advance on the progress track towards finding that planet. And if you're eventually able to move the star to this world at the end, you're triggering the end game, which means you're going to roll some dice to randomly place this somewhere on the board, and then you're racing to get to the paradise planet before alien spacecraft blow you out of the sky. And that does tend to be the hardest thing about this game. You're constantly being pursued by these alien ships that keep coming onto the board and attempting to destroy your spacecraft. So it is a sandbox game with lots of choices and decisions and lots of replayability because there's so many different things that you can do. One of the things that's maybe not unique, but certainly that's different in terms of Project EOS Rise compared to other cooperative games that I've played is that you do assign a game facilitator role at the beginning of the game. Now, usually that's going to be the commander of the ship, but there is one player who's sort of in charge of reading flavor text on cards, of moving the game forward. So if players get bogged down in discussion and planning, eventually the facilitator is going to say, well, okay, we have to move on and take our turns. And it's really, this is the player whose role it is to prevent one of the other players from dominating the game. You know, sometimes in these cooperative games, there'll be one player who's sort of making the decisions and doing all the talking and telling other players what to do. And that alpha player might spoil it for the other players in the game, honestly. So a lot of the time, these cooperative games include some mechanism to mitigate the impact of a single player kind of taking over everything. And the way that they've done it in Project EOS Rise is to assign a game facilitator. So one player is going to sort of not be the boss of all the other ones, but have the goal of keeping the game fun and keeping the game moving so that you're not sitting for 3.5 hours instead of 2.5 because you're taking so much time planning out what you're going to do. Each player in Project EOS Rise is going to have a unique role. So you're going to have the commander, there's a pilot, there's an engineer, and there's a security specialist. They all have individual player abilities and individual player mats, and they all have skill trees that you can advance as you play through. So you're not going to be able to use all of the commander's powers, for example, but one of the ones you want to make sure that you unlock is the ability for each of the other players, including the commander, to have an assistant, so you get some additional options on your turns. What you have here is a randomized galaxy board. You've got individual player boards that have unique abilities. You've also got some worker placement. So this is a worker placement game in part because you've got spaces here in the engine room, for example, where you can repair the hull of the ship. You can charge the shields to reduce the damage that you might take in combat. You can train up your characters in the command room or build another room to upgrade your ship further. These rooms are really important too, not only because they give you some additional areas where you can reduce damage or move damage when your hull takes damage. It doesn't always have to come from the engine room or the command room. If the command room is destroyed, it's game over. But if you do manage to build a mining room, for example, you'll have access to mines, but then you're also going to have a star on this track that gives you a few extra hull points that you can spend from upgrading the ship. So there are several different rooms that you'll be able to access that give you different abilities. You might be able to mine asteroids. That'll give you more credits. The crafting room allows you to build technology that will give each of the players some special power that they can use. You've got a medical room that has some improved treatment of that stress damage. These are all additional places where you'll be able to place workers as well as be able to take damage when your ship is attacked by these aliens. Each of the players, as they upgrade as well, is going to earn a special unique room that's unique to them. There's a little deck. Let me see if I can find it here. There's a deck of these advanced rooms, one for each. They're all color-coded, so you've got one for each player where you can peek through it and choose a card once you begin to work on those advanced skills, and you can place a worker on these rooms in order to use some unique power or advanced power or ability. So you'll start your turn by planning things out and deciding sort of what you want to do. You'll move forward by placing the workers around the ship, and each character has one worker until eventually the commander is going to unlock assistance that gives you some additional workers that you can place around the board. Super important to have that. We sort of worked towards that as early as possible in the game, and that gave us a little bit more flexibility. Then you're going to move the ship around. Maybe you're going to be trying to collect those radio signals, or maybe you're going to attack some alien spaceships that are on the board. And they do have some clever mechanisms in terms of controlling the aliens and dealing with combat. So let me pull out some cards here and I'll show you a little bit what that's all about. So if you've moved on to a starship space like this that also has an alien ship in it, right away you take the alien off the board, that goes back into the bag, and you draw a card of that ship type. So there's separate decks for each ship type, and that's going to give you the ship statistics in terms of, well, it tells you how far it can move before the aliens move. You do draw one of these cards to decide what direction they're going to go in, but really for combat, you need to know about their hull strength, which is how much damage they can take, and how much damage are they going to do if they hit your ship. You'll also draw a damage card for your starship that's going to be shooting at the aliens. So what you're going to do then is players are going to choose, the combat specialist has to participate, but other players can also roll dice in order to try and match the symbols on the damage card, which will hit the ship, and in this case it'll do 3 damage with a hull that can take 8 damage. Once you've rolled those dice, let me see if I can find them. You start with 2 of these dice, and some of the faces have stress damage. So when you're in combat, you're going to get some stress damage potentially. But over the course of time, as your skills advance, you're also going to earn some advanced dice, which don't have the negative faces on them. They only have the good ones that are going to be helpful. There are also some technologies that or abilities that might turn one of these faces into a wild card. There are different rules each round. There's so many things. I cannot possibly explain to you everything about this game. It's as you're playing through it, you do get the hang of it, and it doesn't take long to kind of figure all of this out. But to explain it for the first time, I feel like I'm talking about Cones of Dunshire here from Parks and Recreation. So when you are engaging in combat, first your ship will attack. Whichever characters are going to roll the dice are going to roll these dice. They'll try to match these symbols to do some damage to the ship. And then the ship is going to fight back. Now, sometimes you'll have multiple ships and there'll be multiple cards like this one. I'll see if I can grab another one like this. So if you've got one of these small little guys on the same space at the same time, it's a clever game because you're going to roll a 6-sided die with pips for the alien ships. And if you roll a number that's on their card, that ship is going to do that damage. So there's only one roll that you do, no matter how many alien ships there are. You're going to do one roll and compare that roll to the numbers on these cards. If you've charged up the shields, you're going to have some of these shields tokens, and before the alien player rolls, whoever's going to do the roll for the alien, you can cover up some of these numbers in order to reduce the chance that your ship is going to get hit. So it is very clever, and the combat goes quickly, and then there's going to be a back and forth between your ship and the alien ship in terms of trying to do damage and get those guys off the board. If you win the combat, there might be some objects on these cards that you're going to collect, maybe some skill advancements. There are some rewards at the bottom that you get for destroying that ship. But once you've done your movement, and if there's combat and the EOS ship gets to attack the aliens, then the aliens start to move. And like I said, the cards will get drawn from the specific alien ship decks, and they're going to move around the board. They might be converging on the radio signals, or they might be converging on your spaceship in order to attack it. And we often found that we would have 3 or 4 ships right on top of us. And that's partly because we would focus on advancing the engineer first and the combat specialist or the commander so that we could get those tokens. And the poor pilot couldn't fly very far to get away from these things. So we never really upgraded the pilot very much. And I think next time we play, we'll focus on upgrading the pilot to give us more freedom to move around the board and run away from these guys. So the alien ships are going to move, and then they're going to attack. You don't get to fight back on if the aliens are chasing you. So they're going to roll their damage dice. You do get to place some shield tokens on them to block things off, but they're going to roll their damage dice, and then they get discarded. But more ships redeploy every round. So it's you're going to have a bunch of ships chasing after you. You can see there's some tokens on the board. There are a whole bunch of things that are randomly placed, including space stations where you can go to an alien space station and earn some kind of bonus or maybe a penalty by rolling dice. It might stress you out to go visit those spaceships. So there are lots of things to do in this game. There are contracts that you can collect, and if you're able to fulfill a contract, you're going to get some bonus, usually on the funding track or the intelligence track, which is going to allow you to earn some of those signals that will move you further along on this progress track. So it sounds complicated when I explain it. It's very easy to understand once you've played through a turn or two of this game. The hard part is figuring out where you're going to move this ship. How are you going to upgrade your spaceship and your characters in order to win the game? That's the real challenge. And like I said, we have not yet unlocked the strategy that's going to work. In fact, the designer, James Baker, told me that he has a hard time winning his own. He created the game, and he has a hard time figuring out the best strategy to win this game. We're talking about a game that combines the cooperative missions with individual player powers, individual player missions, and contracts that they can fulfill, upgradable characters, an upgradable ship, plenty of choices about what you do, a real sandbox game, streamlined combat where you're assigning dice, and really it's push your luck because your ship gets damaged so quickly. You really have to choose whether you're going to try and enter combat or try to run away and get away from as many of those ships as possible. But it's not easy to do, especially the small ones fly around the board pretty far. So there's a lot going on, but like I said, it does manage it pretty well once you've played through a few turns of the game. Now, like I said earlier, the way that Project EOS Rise deals with the alpha player problem that's so common in cooperative games is that they assign a game facilitator whose job is to keep things moving and to keep things fun. But different games have different ways of dealing with that. And that is my question for you this episode. How do you deal when you're playing with kids or your friends in a cooperative game and you've got one player who's kind of taking the lead and taking charge? How do you solve the alpha player problem in the games that you play? You can answer that question in the comments section below the video. But of course, we're going to talk about what skills are you developing by playing a game like Project EOS Rise. And this is clearly a game with lots of budgeting and planning involved. You really do have to plan ahead. You have a limited number of turns to move that star up the progress track and find the paradise planet that's going to save humanity. But there are so many other interesting things to do along the way, upgrading your ship and upgrading your characters. There are lots of things that you can do in this game, but you really do have to keep your eyes on the prize and focus. Now, I'm telling you how to win the game, and I haven't won a game of this yet, but you do have to keep your eye on the prize, be organized, be efficient in your turns, and plan ahead in terms of what you're going to do. And if you're organizing and budgeting and planning and working towards being efficient and resisting the urge to do something that might be fun or interesting but won't move you towards that goal, well, those are all examples of executive functioning skills, the behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. And those are super important skills for focus and attention and, as I said, planning and organization. So this is a heavy strategy game, medium to heavy strategy game that has a lot of those executive functioning behaviors involved if you're going to even try to win the game. There are spatial skills here as well. You are looking at this board and trying to figure out which direction you're going to go and how far you can get based on your pilot's ability. So you've got a little bit of spatial involvement here as well. But one of the things that I do like about co-op games is that you do get that opportunity for negotiation and compromise and co-op. I mean, it's a co-op game. You're cooperating in the game. So you do have to kind of come up with win-win, and you need to assert yourself and kind of state your ideas in order to participate in the game, but listen to advice of other players as well. So there are social skills involved when you're playing these co-op games, and dealing with the alpha player problem is one of those social skills. Now, final thoughts. I can't say final thoughts for this game because it's such a big, sprawling sandbox game that these aren't really my final thoughts. These are my first impressions. It's a game that I want to play again. I'm looking at this board right now and I kind of want to puzzle it out and work on building up the pilot and seeing how that helps, and choosing different advanced rooms and maybe chasing after some contracts instead of focusing on building up our technology or the medical room for combat. So there's a lot going on in this game that I still want to try. There's so much replayability that I think that this is a really fantastic co-op experience. And I do like that they've included the role of game facilitator to keep things moving and fun. It sort of creates a situation where it's almost like you're playing a role-playing game, but one of the players is also the game master whose job is to keep things fun and keep things moving. The ship improvement and the character advancement, the skill trees. I love games with skill trees because it does remind me of those old tabletop RPGs that I used to play in high school. But the skill trees I think I really like, and they do add to the replayability, even though there's only 4 roles. If you're playing with fewer than 4 players, all 4 roles are always assigned in this game. I didn't mention that earlier. And I think if you do play with fewer than 4, maybe you want to give the game facilitator one less character to control so that they can have more brain space and brain power to focus on those other things like keeping the game fun and keeping it moving. So I do feel like this is a game that kind of uh, it's an evolution maybe of the old Pandemic game that I haven't played Pandemic Legacy, so I haven't played every single co-op game. The one that I've focused on, my favorite co-op game I think that I've played in recent years is Burgle Bros, and I can't wait to get my hands on Burgle Bros 2, and I'll probably talk about that on the channel. But this is a real evolution of the Pandemic style of gameplay that was sort of pared down for games like Burgle Bros or Forbidden Island or Forbidden Desert, where you've got some role playing and worker placement that are added in to the game as well. It's super thematic with a great table presence, I think, and some really streamlined kind of combat rules that do involve pushing your luck. Now, if there are downsides, it is maybe a little intimidating to learn. It is a heavy game. You're definitely not going to win every game. So if you're playing with a teenager who's very sensitive and easily frustrated about losing, well, be prepared to lose this one unless you maybe develop some house rules or tailor things to make the game a little bit easier. It's got that great table presence, but it also is a table hog. It took up our entire 6x4 foot table with all of the pieces and all of the decks of cards and making sure that we had everything within easy reach. It wasn't always easy, so you do need a big space to play this game, and there are a lot of things to keep track of. So probably best if your game facilitator is someone who's had some experience with the game in order to keep track of everything. You know, remembering that there are unique, there are things I didn't even talk about. There's a deck for each of these. You see different color codes on the board for different areas of space, and there's are unique rules depending on where you are, and those are going to change every round. Anyway, I can't explain every single thing about this game in a short video, but boy, did we have fun playing it. Boy, is it a game that I want to play again, despite the fact that there is a lot to keep track of and the rule book is a little intimidating. Like I said, once we sat down and we played through a turn, it became very clear. The terms in the rule book are clear once you play through it, and this is an easy game to like and a very hard game to win. So thanks so much to the folks over at Flipside Game Studios and to James Baker for sending this game my way. I'll put information about the crowdfunding campaign as soon as I have it, and that will go in the show notes below the video. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, if you want to answer my question, you can leave those in the comment section below, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.